Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I don't know when you are watching this. And another episode of Let's Talk About Hegel, the live sessions of HegelCourses.com. Just a reminder, we can be found on HegelCourses.wordpress.com. That is our current website. Studying Hegel, Let's Talk About Hegel is a series where I just start talking about some aspects of Hegel's philosophy. This year we are especially devoted to the philosophy of mind or philosophy of spirit. So we're reading major parts of the third section of the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences. I have two topics today. The first topic has to do with a question that I saw flashing by. It was about the position of atheism towards Hegel's discussion of religion. And the second is about philosophy of art. We will be reading two small sections of the philosophy of spirit today. But those are the two topics of today. So nice that you are here, and welcome to this show. Okay, so the first issue, the question someone asks: what can you do with the philosophy of religion, with the position of religion within the three manifestations of absolute spirit, if you are an atheist? Now, there are many different brands and types of atheism. I'm supposing that whoever put forward that question is actually an atheist in the sense that he denies the existence of God and thereby judges the entirety of religion to be superfluous, maybe damaging even, certainly not a good way to understand the world and ourselves. That is a kind of rude, very general form of atheism, because I will argue later on that there are more sophisticated forms of atheism. Let me say this first. Even if you are an atheist, you are, or precisely because you are just an atheist, you are simply denying the existence of God. So you're presuming that if you focus your attack on the notion of the existence of God, that you have thereby totally dismissed the whole idea of religion. Now, what does that have to do with Hegel? Is Hegel an atheist? Isn't he an atheist? I'm not sure. From a certain perspective, he might be called an atheist because Hegel is not interested in the question of the existence of God in the way that the atheist talks about it. Hegel is interested in the structure of religious consciousness, and that religious consciousness and religion as such is simply part of modern culture, coming from the classical period of European civilization. He's not asking the question, is religious consciousness, when it affirms, for instance, the existence of God, whether or not that religion is correct, truthful, realistic. But he's saying there is something going on in the structure of that consciousness, in the structure of religion, that has to be taken seriously when we talk about the history of the absolute spirit, the development of spirit in European culture. Now, an atheist can deny some elements of that religious consciousness, certainly, but he cannot deny the existence of the thing that he is actually attacking. He cannot deny the existence of religion. Precisely, the existence of religion is the presupposition of his critique of religion. So why can't an atheist agree with Hegel that it's important to understand what religion actually is and how it has influenced the development of European culture and what role, if any, it has to play in the philosophy of spirit, the understanding of humanity and human spirituality. Second thing I need to say is that an atheist, when denying the existence of God, is denying what Hegel would call an element of positive religion. Hegel makes a distinction between religion as such, as a structure of consciousness, as a way of relating to truth and the world and the absolute, and what he calls positive religion. And that is the way that a religion functions in a historical community, a community that has a cult, that has certain convictions, has a creed. As an atheist, you might want to attack the creed. You might want to attack some statements that are being made within a religious community, but that doesn't change the fact that you can also try to understand religion, that you can try to understand the structure of it, the implications of the fact that, for instance, Europe has been religious, the Catholic era, the Protestant era, and has now turned either indifferent to religion or has become at least secularized and atheist. So in those two elements, first of all, there is a structure of religious consciousness, and there is a difference between religion as such and positive religion. There you find the first answer to the question was, what can an atheist do with Hegel's analysis of religion? Well, without continuously attacking elements of positive religion, an atheist can understand the structure of religion as a part of the makeup, the structure of consciousness, or rather as an element of the spirit as such. But there's another way to look at it, and this is my third statement about it. What kind of an atheist do you want to be? If an atheist is merely attacking positive religion, that's fine, but it's not really philosophically interesting. It would be interesting if you can find a way to say that Hegel's understanding of religion as a historic fact is wrong, or that there are other ways to understand religion. Then you would be part of the philosophical dialogue, which you are not if you're merely attacking elements of positive religion. That's not what Hegel talks about. And as I mentioned before, there are other forms of atheism. How about the atheism of Emmanuel Levinas? That's an atheism that says God is not like Hegel thought, the absolute that is both beyond us and within us, or it's actually the whole of reality and how it relates to itself, the self-understanding or the self-awareness of absolute reality. Well, that's a kind of atheism on Levinas' part, including an attack on Hegel's way of understanding religion. But Levinas will say that atheism must be understood as the consistent denial of all gods. Everything that maintains itself as a god is an idol. So where can we find the true God? According to Levinas, we can find it in the encounter with the other, because that's actually the only way that we find an expression of the absolute, which at the same time is very vulnerable and still has this character of moral absoluteness. I'm not going into Levinas today, but at least we can understand that his position against everything that is divinized, that is made more than human, that should be rejected. That's a kind of atheism. We have a kind of atheism in Karl Barth's theology. That's the theology in the mid-20th century that is closest to any philosophy that I am aware of. And in his, let's say, philosophical theology, what actually is going on is a rejection of all religion. That is also very important. A question by Ruby. How can we talk about end of religion? Um, the end of religion can be taken in two ways. You can say it's the historical end of all positive religion. So there are no communities anymore that have a cult and a creed and a specific kind of morality. Um, in the terms of positive religion, we can talk about that, but not, I think, as a philosophical idea, but as something that really concerns our social realities and our own history. But we can certainly talk about the end of religion in another sense of the word, and that is the point where religion, um, from within itself, has to transition, leave itself behind, but take all the good with it, so to speak, and turn into philosophy. Philosophical understanding of religion is the ultimate point of the culmination of the development of religion itself. If you are really completely religious in all senses of the word, you will stop being just a member of a religious community and you will become a philosopher. That is Hegel's idea that beyond the manifestation of the absolute in the form of religion, there is the manifestation in the form of the concept of the idea of understanding. So, in a way, understanding religion is the transition beyond religion and is the end of religion in some sense of the word. Then I use the word end not as um, a finite point in time where positive religion will no longer be important in the world, but in the sense of the finis, the goal. Um, Weirdly enough, I truly believe that atheism, in not in this crude sense of the word, but in the fullness of the word, is actually something that belongs to the development of Protestantism. Um, the demasque of the gods, so to speak, the um, development beyond this attempt to make everything divine that is high and important to us. This atheism is actually a part of Protestantism. Protestantism by itself leads to atheism. I think that is a Hegelian statement. I'm not arguing pro or contra, but I'm merely stating that that is the outcome of Hegel's thinking. Protestant religion leads to the attempt to understand religion as the self-awareness or the self-consciousness of the absolute itself. And that goes beyond, let's say, Trinitarian creeds, beyond the cult, beyond prayer, beyond everything that we find in positive religion. So in Karl Barth, we have something similar, where Karl Barth actually denies the reality of religion. He said religion is man-made, but there is something in the structure of, for Karl Barth, in something within history that seems to transcend this idea of a man-made religion. That's a, how shall we call that, kind of Christian atheism. He is against positive religions. He acknowledges that Christianity also is like a positive religion, but still he thinks that within Christianity as a positive religion, this notion of uh, the absolute speaking is maintained. Now, for a Hegelian, that is quite interesting because it means that in human speech, something like the absolute is also manifest, which is exactly what Hegel means by the word religion. So that would be my answer to you, Ruby. How can we talk about the end of religion? Well, in these two terms. And even if we will find out in the near future that indeed all positive religions will fade away, we still have, as a part of our history, part of our background, the structure of religious consciousness to deal with. Let me take you to a little text by Hegel about religion that actually um, supports my statement about Hegel. So uh, let's go to this little text. But this is part of the encyclopedia. It's paragraph 562. And then this paragraph, and I think this is part of the Zusätze, the additions to the text of Hegel based on the lecture notes by his students. Let's read a little bit of this. I'm not going to explain everything. We've tried to explain everything, but just want you to focus on a couple of elements here. The philosophy of religion has to discover the logical necessity in the progress by which the being, known as the absolute, assumes fuller and firmer features. Oh, wait a minute. There is a question that I simply can't overlook right now. How does structure of religious consciousness manifest in atheism and secular world? Well, for instance, if atheism is primarily the denial, the negation of the affirmation God exists, then atheism has the same basic structure as this very crude kind of faith, merely in the abstract negative. So the concept of the absolute, the concept of God, would be active within an atheist position as well. An atheist has some kind of idea of what he is denying. Now, the relationship between the atheist consciousness and the thing that he is denying is actually just the reverse of what the, let's say, a believer will have, but he does so in an abstract affirmation, because the thesis that God exists is a very abstract affirmation of the reality of the absolute. The affirmation of the reality of the absolute is way more complex and actually consists of the entirety of Hegel's system. To understand how in finite things, finite structures, finite forms of consciousness, there is something that we must call the absolute, something that refers to the totality in which something is posited, something that refers to the undeniability, the infinite mode of what we are talking about. Whenever we say that something is finite, whenever we discuss what is negative in something, there is a presupposition of its reverse, which is the absoluteness of the thing that we're talking about. We're talking about things that are wrong in society. There's the idea of a good society. That's the intrusion. That's a very good way of saying it, but the intrusion of the notion of the absolute within our understanding of this society that we are putting under critique. So the absolute is in a Hegelian perspective, like a necessary presupposition of everything we talk about. It's contained in this copula is. Whenever we say that something is, whenever we predicate something about something, according to Hegel, this absolute is hidden in the form of our propositions. You cannot talk about something determined and finite unless you have a context, a wider context, which is infinity, actually, that you cut into to focus on something finite. But that finite, the finitude of everything we talk about, is actually dependent upon the entirety of the context, the whole in which it is still posited and where it's a part of. So according to Hegel, it's impossible to talk about anything without indirectly referring to the absolute or the totality of which this thing is a part. And necessarily so, because the determinacy of anything is defined by the fact that it is not something else. The absolute is whatever it is as a notion. But everything finite is whatever it is by not being all the other things. It has a relationship, negative relationship to everything else that it is not. And that's important. We cannot define, for instance, the individual without indirectly referring to what the individual is not. Well, that is first and foremost. He is not a group. He is not a whole assembly. He is not the whole of society. But this negation of the society, vital in defining the individual, is actually what makes the individual the individual. So in order to speak about the individual, we have to talk about what the individual as a notion is denying, and also see that this connection is very much real. So what is an individual ultimately is a kind of negation of the social. Now, what does that mean? That's up, of course, for a further examination. But basically, you can say that um, even trying to define and understand the individual is necessary to refer, even negatively, to everything else it is and to the absolute ultimately out of which it comes forth. Let's return. Let's return to the passage in 562. But thank you very much, Ruby, for these two very interesting questions. Okay, so the philosophy of religion has to discover the logical necessity, and I talk about structure, he's talking about logical necessity, and the progress by which the being as such, the whole of reality, known as the absolute, insofar as it merely refers to itself, there's nothing outside of itself, assumes fuller and firmer features. Excuse me. So we need to take steps driven by necessity from one position to the other to understand more how religion manifests the absolute. It has to know to what particular feature the kind of cultus corresponds. What is going on in the Protestant service? What does that tell us about human consciousness and religious consciousness? Not simply to be discarded as the work of some priestly class or some weird teacher-pupil relationship as in Protestantism. You cannot reduce it to something of a social nature or cultural nature. You have to see that it's a demonstration or manifestation or exposition of a religious consciousness in a very particular form within a positive religion. Of course, it's a positive religion, the specifics of the cult, etc. Well, for instance, that could lead, and Hegel does that in another work of his, to an examination of what exactly worship means, what it means to pray, what it means to read a text that is supposed to be of a transcendent nature, what it means to have this, let's say, structure in the service from beginning to end. How does that actually work? What is the emphasis here? Is it on the reading of the text, or is it on the prayer, or is it something meditative? But you can examine the cult, the Protestant cult, which is for Hegel the Lutheran cult, to see what it is all about, what it tries to do, and then derive from that a concept of the essence of at least that form of religious consciousness. And then to see how the secular self-consciousness that is not fully determined by religion, the consciousness of what is the supreme vocation of man, in short, how the nature of a nation's moral life. This is an interesting point. Hegel argues that religion in a nation expresses something of the consciousness, the way of relating to the world and yourself that is very peculiar to a specific nation and national culture. So if you want to understand that, you need to understand the religion of that country. The principle of its law, on what is the law based, of its actual liberty and of its constitution, as well as of its arts and science. So the complete sphere of the objective spirit, which is society, and the absolute spirit, which is art, religion, and philosophy and science. You have to see the nature of the principle working here by examining religion. That is a quite interesting idea, isn't it? That an atheist can try to understand his own culture by looking at religious consciousness without even having the need to either affirm or deny tenets of faith that are held in the positive religion. It simply is not relevant. You examine religion as an historical manifestation of the absolute. Corresponds to the principle which constitutes the substance of a religion. So not the subjectivity of a religion, but the substance, simply what it is in itself, given within history. That all these elements of a nation's actuality constitute one systematic totality, that one spirit creates and informs them, is a truth on which follows the further truth that the history of religions coincides with the world history. So if you look at the history of religions, in a way you can find there how the absolute within human consciousness, as an object of human consciousness, has actually developed. And that means the same as saying that we are looking at the way human consciousness developed. Because if you look at the history of religion, it's quite interesting to see the great transitions within that, from medieval Catholic piety to Protestant, more negative piety, and then in the 19th century, the emergence of pietism. And then in the 20th century, let's say the great battle between evangelical Christianity and, on the other hand, the secularization of religion and various forms of atheism. I mean, all of that is food for thought in which you can see something of a progress. The atheism is a term that can be used for Jews in the first century because they deny the existence of the Roman gods, as easily as it can be used in the 20th century for an Hegelian philosopher who denies the tenets and principles of positive religion because he's not interested in them anymore. He just wants to understand how these forms of consciousness work. Okay, that's the remark I wanted to make about another question by Ruby. Thank you for that. What does religion get from atheism? Religion gets from atheism that it becomes more humble, that it understands its own limitations, and possibly that it understands that it's not the existence of God that is its real basic statement. I don't think any religion starts with the question, well, whether does God exist or not. It's something that you can find in Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, one of the questions that his summary of Christian theology starts with. And it's not really the foundation of religion at all. Before you learn to affirm the existence of God, which, by the way, seems to me is a quite mistaken proposition, even from a religious point of view, because existence has nothing to do with the subject God. If God is in some way, he certainly does not exist, because existence, certainly after Kant, means to have a place within reality that is in principle part of our common experience. So it's a very bad thing to say that God exists. If you mean by God truly the philosophical notion of God, God cannot exist in that same sense. He must be somehow the ground or the reference point or the absolute within existence, but he cannot simply be said to exist. So from a religious point of view, that kind of atheism makes no sense. What does religion get from atheism? Well, precisely this understanding that it's not central to its own existence as religion to affirm the existence of God. Actually, it's detrimental to that way of thinking. It is an affirmation that only arose because atheism and religion were each other's abstract contradictions. So that happened during the age of the Enlightenment. Hegel described that as the abstract struggle between knowledge and belief, Glauben und Wissen, which was detrimental to both of them. No, faith has way more to do with a basic attitude and orientation toward being. That's a very nice way that Paul Tillich describes it like that. So the religious attitude is an affirmation of being, of course, with the usage of ideas of faith, tenets, propositions of faith. But as Hegel will show, those are philosophically interesting. But what is philosophically interesting in religion is not the affirmation that God exists. Actually, that is a very wrong way to talk about God. Okay, again, thank you very much. So atheism supports true religion, to say it correctly, and true religion is not opposed to atheism. Now I'm announcing things that I can't talk about today because I want to get to art as well, and I have very, very little time left. So if you don't mind, I'm going to continue now with some remarks about art. Okay, thanks for listening to this channel, and thank you for your questions. And now we come to the second subject today, and that is the notion of art in Hegel's philosophy. I'm going to talk about that extensively next week, and we start a series of videos on these passages, starting with paragraph 556, that deal with various forms of art. But there's one idea that I mentioned earlier, and some people have asked me to explain that as much as I can. The basic idea is that Hegel announces the end of romantic art. Now, what is that all about? The philosophy of art in Hegel, looking at it from the outside, it seems to me, combines different elements of the theory of art before him, especially Kant. First of all, art has to do with beauty. It's a sort of self-evident idea before Hegel wrote his philosophy of art. Art has to do with beauty, and that's all. So someone like David Hume will explain that beauty, this attractiveness that we experience because we are sensuous beings, something delights us, something is beautiful, that is the only thing that art is supposed to do. That's one thing. Well, the other thing is that art is, like in the rationalist metaphysics before Kant, someone like Baumgarten or Leibniz Wolff, those systems, that art is like a notion that is not yet fully expressed. It's like a confused notion. And if you move beyond it, you get into the conceptual realm, and then you can truly express what the thing is. But you might say it's the explanation of a work of art that actually is the truth that is within the work of art. Now, it can't be both true at the same time, simply as it is given to us in history. You can't say art is about making works of beauty that delight us and have this interaction with our senses. We love to see something that is beautiful. And you can't simply say, well, all art is just waiting to be conceptualized and understood. And that's really where the truth lies. Hegel is looking at it from a little bit of a different angle, just as I just said about the structure of religious consciousness. He is interested in the structure of a work of art. Let's go to the text so I can show you what I mean. But this is paragraph 556 that I'm going to talk about extensively next week. And we see here this. As this consciousness of the absolute first takes shape, so the first and immediate form of this consciousness of the absolute, its immediacy produces the factor of finitude in art. So it's just immediate. It's not really self-reflective. It's expressing itself, but it's not reflecting on itself. Then we have art as finitude, as a finite expression of the infinite. There's something wrong and there is something right here. So art expresses the absolute, but in such a way that the absolute is caught in something that is finite. What does that mean, this finite? He explains it. On one hand, that is, it breaks up into a work of external common existence, a piece of wood, patches of color, of paint, hanging in a museum. a work of external common existence, and into the subject which produces that work. That's the second element. There's an artisan, there's a painter, or a sculptor, or a composer. There's someone who is making this work of external common existence, and the subject which contemplates and worships it. Contemplates is a word that we can use also in our modern time. We're looking, we're watching a piece of art, or we're listening to a piece of music. And in olden times, let's say in the Greek era, Greek antiquity, such a statue as, for instance, a sculpture might made of the god Apollo is also worshipped. Ah, what is there going on? We were going to talk about it with reference to Martin Heidegger's De Ursprung des Kunstwerkes, the origin of the work of art. But on the other hand, it's the concrete contemplation and mental picture of implicitly absolute spirit as the ideal. In a nice way to describe, that's the only thing I'm going to take from this sentence. The absolute spirit is implicit in something as the ideal. For Hegel, art was not about realism as developed after his death, after 1850, but a work of art is about idealizing. I mean, you can see that in the portraits of the 16th and 17th century. It's sort of a likeness with the person involved, but it is also an exaggeration to cover the ideal. And the ideal is then, let's say, how the absolute, the full and total meaning of someone or something is caught into this work of art, this work of beauty, making it totally different from a photograph that merely captures the moment itself. And of course, photography wasn't invented yet. So Hegel is talking about this idealization of finite things so that the absolute shines through the ultimate picture that is made, the painting that is made. The ideal. In this ideal, or the concrete shape born of the subjective spirit, of course, it's a subjective invention and imagination, its natural immediacy, the fact that I can see in a portrait the likeness of a person, which is only a sign of the idea, because it doesn't express exactly, let's say, ideas about perfect humanity or the characteristics even that are part of the real person that is depicted, is so transfigured by the informing spirit in order to express the idea that the figure shows it and it alone. So that is another kind of demand that you can put on a painting, a work of art, that it only expresses what it expresses. That's a measure of its excellence. And the more it refers also to other things, like a photograph where you have a background that is simply there and without reason, it hasn't been, let's say, choreographed, it hasn't been selected in order to enhance the main idea, but is simply there. No, there is an informing spirit, there is a subject that tries to make a work of art that only shows what it needs to show, without distraction, without, let's say, the vulgarity of the incidental. And to the degree that a work of art succeeds in doing that, we can call it beautiful. That's what beauty then actually means, that the figure shows itself and it alone, and thereby expresses the ideal here. And the idea, no, we have to see at another time what this connection is between the ideal that he says here and the idea that is for a later time. Let me go back to some final statements. Hegel thought that the kind of art that he found in his day and age, people like Goya and Constable and other wonderful English landscape painters, that era came to an end. That is the era in which art tried to envision the absolute as it was present in the finite and make works of art that imaginatively represented, or rather presented the ideal. And by the way, that's a very important distinction. A representation is merely like a photograph. It shows you what was at a certain time. That's a representation. But he thought that the work of art actually was a presentation. It made something present in front of you. And that's a very important distinction. But he thought that the end of art was coming. He saw that happening in his day and age, because interestingly, you see a couple of forms of art in the latter days of Hegel's life that do not conform to this ideal of romantic art, the art that puts beauty in the first place. You have painters like Delacroix and Goya that also seem to show the evil in the world, or they are like a social critique, like showing, like Van Gogh did with the potato eaters and people working in the fields. He captured, let's say, the worn out hands and the fatigue that must have been there in reality, but he turned it into something beautiful because he showed it so well, and so without these distracting elements to it. Hegel didn't understand that, or he did not take that into, he couldn't take that up into his philosophy, because it wasn't art that could be understood as a manifestation of the absolute. And that gives us a very interesting problem to consider. Because what then is the status of art after Hegel? And we sometimes refer to our age as post-mortem Hegelis, that is to say, after the death of Hegel, where everything changes. It changes in society with the Parisian uprising, etc., and with the Austrian-German War. But it changes in art by these early forms of realism that Hegel could have seen and would not have appreciated as art. Realism, and then later Impressionism, also a 19th century invention. Modernism in the early 20th century, Cubism, and Surrealism, certainly. And then after that, of course, the advance of abstract art and postmodernism, and then what we have in what we simply call contemporary art still, I believe. The whole range of social critique actually encapsulated within contemporary forms of art. Hegel had no idea about that, and he was certainly not able to see that that would also be like an expression or manifestation of the absolute spirit. But that is our question then. So what is then the status, the philosophical status of all these ideas about art, all these forms of art that developed after Hegel's death? And what was exactly, I mean, the most interesting and vital question is, what should Hegel have thought about realism and about, let's say, the paintings by Goya depicting war? That is, well, the area that we're going to talk about. Of course, I'm going to read the text next week, starting next week, in the philosophy of art. But these are the questions that, well, keep me awake at night, that are difficult to understand. Maybe I will never find this satisfying answer, but these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay, it's 3/4 of an hour. I think that is sufficient for this live session of Let's Talk About Hegel. Thank you all for listening and being part of this conversation, and especially thanks to Ruby Grew, who had 3 very interesting questions at the beginning of this session. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope you will join us again next week. Don't forget, hegelcourses.wordpress.com. See you later. See you later. Have a good time.